How much does it cost Santa to park his sleigh?
How much?
Nothing. It's on the house. Folks, welcome back to Brand Coverage, a mostly fantasy football podcast. I'm Brandon alongside my co-host Pat Gustafson. We've got quite a show for you today. We are back after our little brief 1 week reprieve last week because I was doing just about a million things for the last 12 days. I told Pat this is actually my first time home in 12 days. We had a little vacation in Florida followed by a wedding in Connecticut, which was also surrounded by a little bit of house hunting in Connecticut, but we'll have more updates on that for you guys as they become available. They are, as of yet, not overly available. But let's just say my time in Denver is likely coming to an end. However, we will not, jinx that just yet. We do have plenty of stuff to go over today, though, because while I was gone and in Florida, I was like, of course this is going to happen when I'm not able to be at my fucking setup in my computer, make a video about it, at least podcast, whatever. We've basically been talking like this was going to happen for a while anyway. But for me to not be able to make any content about Aaron Rodgers finally signing with the Steelers, it was a little bit annoying, but it is what it is. He is finally a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Pat, he's also married. Apparently, he said he got married a few months ago. So fucking good for him.
Patrick, yeah.
Good for. Who else has he dated? I don't know. There's other celebrities, I think, and they've all basically said he's a dickhead, but that's not surprising.
That doesn't sound right, honestly.
Now,
sounds unfair.
Yeah, it's definitely out of character. We do have a couple of other signings that we're going to talk about before we get to our fantasy football preview of the week, which, again, we're going to continue through the divisions. Today, we're going to do the AFC North, where we will talk largely about, Aaron Rodgers and that situation. But just to kind of touch on it really quickly, Pat, the general fantasy impact of Aaron Rodgers going to the Steelers, I think, to me, again, we've talked about this as if it was going to happen anyway. I think it just makes the Steelers players at least semi-palatable rather than complete avoids. Because if this team was going to go into the season with Mason Rudolph as its starting quarterback, I don't know how you can draft any Pittsburgh Steeler and not think this is going to be literally the most abysmal offense in the league. Rodgers, while he's certainly not the Rodgers of old, he can at least be good enough to steer a ship of a middling, maybe top 20-ish offense rather than just straight up being the 32nd best offense in football led by Mason Rudolph. So I think that's the initial takeaway here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it boosts the value of Steelers players, but quite frankly, there just aren't a lot. Like, I don't think this is going to make Calvin Austin a thing or Roman Wilson a thing. I think it boosts DK Metcalf's value.
DK Cutie Pie.
And, obviously it will help the running game as well, which we'll talk about may not be the most appealing anyway. But, yeah, it basically... Are you going to, start Rodgers? No. I have no interest in him,
God,
but
no.
I'd say the winner here is DK Metcalf, and in theory it would have been George Pickens. Rest in peace, GP Glazer. Had to shoehorn that in.
Yeah, we will remember you forever, GP Glazer. Thank you for your service, even though you still show up here. I don't know if you've changed your username yet, but I imagine eventually you will. Some other signings, Pat, because this, look, we talked about it, I think, in our last show, how the free agent market just had not heated up for whatever reason post-draft. It has really chugged along here, but some of these vets are finally finding teams, particularly the running backs, one of them being Nick Chubb. The Texans are bringing in Nick Chubb to join their backfield. Now, I do think this is, a solid move from a real-life football perspective. It can't hurt to have a guy like Nick Chubb on the roster when, your main running back, Joe Mixon, had a really nice year last year, even though he did fade toward the end. But when you've got, an aging guy like Mixon, it doesn't hurt to have some depth behind him. Chubb is also aging. I think Chubb's probably older than Joe Mixon at this point, but I'm sure they're close. Definitely doesn't hurt to help bolster that depth chart a little bit. I did see a tweet that was like, what? This is now a top blank backfield in the NFL, and asking where they fall. Listen, while this is a good depth add, this doesn't really change the Texans' backfield status in terms of overall where they stand in the league when fully healthy. Because I don't know that Nick Chubb in his current state is a much better upgrade over what they already had at their RB2, which was Dameon Pierce. I just don't think this doesn't really move the needle like this. Some people inevitably are going to see the Nick Chubb name and be like, "Oh my God, Nick Chubb and Joe Mixon, same backfield. It's going to be awesome." It's not. Pat, I hate that Nick Chubb has forced this discourse out of me because I love the guy and I hate that this is the player that I have to keep being negative about and keep like reminding people like, guys, as much as I'd love for it to be the case, he's not the old Nick Chubb anymore. He's not. And look, he may have a better year this year than last just to have an extra year to recover from that knee injury, but the knee injury still happened. He's now got several of them under his belt. He is now another year older, and the money they signed him for implies that he's only going to be a 20% sort of snap share player anyway. This is not going to be a rotate him and Mixon every other series kind of situation. So I want that to be clear to people that, like, I know it's Nick Chubb, it's exciting, he's on a team. Guys, there's also a reason he's available on the first week of June. Like, there's a reason he's been out there this long. He is not this major asset for fantasy football. He's not even on the radar for fantasy football.
Yeah, I personally think this changes literally nothing. Like I responded to your tweet where it was like, Joe Mixon is a top blank wide running back, and I said wherever he was yesterday, because this literally has zero impact on him. The only impact it has is if in the situation where Joe Mixon were to go down, you're looking at Nick Chubb as a startable handcuff running back, but that's all he is. He's not even a top tier handcuff at that. He's just simply a backup running back who has a lot more presence and, is a lot more of a veteran established than Dameon Pierce. So it's an upgrade in that sense. But for fantasy football, it could not move the scale any less than
The only thing I will say is that I could see Chubb taking some of those touchdowns away, some of those high value touches from Joe Mixon, because if you're going to sign a guy like Nick Chubb, that's the kind of thing you're probably signing him for, is that prowess at the goal line. I mean, this guy, he's still built like a fucking Mack truck. He's just not a guy that's going to be able to withstand a large number of touches over the course of a season or even a game. But the reason it doesn't change that much for me anyway, Pat, is I probably wasn't really going to be in on Joe Mixon this season much. And we'll discuss where we actually land on that when we go over the AFC South, whenever that is in the coming weeks. But, ageism absolutely a factor. I mean, he's going to be 29 when the season he's going to be 29 when the season starts. But there's also the fact that he did fade down the stretch last year, and the fact that the Texans and their O-line, for whatever reason, were able to run block well last year, but they couldn't pass block worth a shit. So they're not going to lean on the run that heavily again if they have their way with, rebuilding or re-identifying this sort of offense with a new offensive coordinator, with Nick Caley, with a restructured offensive line, with a new offensive line coach and some new pieces on that line. It's not going to be what it was last year. And last year was really kind of a perfect storm for Joe Mixon to have one of the better fantasy seasons of his career. Let me pull up actually where he finished last year.
God, was a monster the first half of the year.
He was. So he finished as RB13, RB13 overall, despite missing 3 games from week 3 through 5. So that was obviously a great season for Mixon, but just not a guy I feel like I'm going to be going out of my way to target. And then now that they've added Nick Chubb, it's like, just another, it's not a major sway either way, but it's just another thing that doesn't, give me confidence. But Nick Chubb does have a home. That's good. I'm glad we get to keep seeing Nick Chubb play football. And look, I would love to be wrong. I would love for this man to prove me wrong. I just don't necessarily see it happening. But at least he gets to continue his career. Another running back signing, Pat, probably the biggest one because the guy that we think has the most juice out of the ones that were still available, and that is J.K. Dobbins. He is a Denver Bronco coming to my neck of the woods, or at least my current neck of the woods. This is an interesting one because the Broncos and their selection of R.J. Harvey have been largely the a large topic of discussion among the fantasy community because RJ Harvey was not a guy that coming into the draft we knew was going to have a large workload or be immediately relevant for fantasy football. He just wasn't that level of prospect where it's like, okay, no matter where he goes, he's going to get a ton of touches in year one. Then he went to Denver, where based on their backfield situation, it looked like that was exactly the case. That was why he was such a riser in, dynasty drafts or rookie drafts and startups or whatever, because he is stepping into a backfield that was just so abysmal last year that it looked like, okay, cool, even though he's a second-round pick, like he's going to be the guy in this backfield. Adding anybody of relevance to this backfield with a guy like RJ Harvey already in it, I think muddies it up just to a degree that RJ Harvey owners and early investors probably aren't thrilled about. But Pat, where do you land with this, and how are you feeling about RJ Harvey and J.K. Dobbins after the signing?
I mean, it does kind of pour a lot of cold water on the RJ Harvey fire. And, you could say similarly to Nick Chubb, there's a reason J.K. Dobbins was available at this point in the offseason. I mean, granted, he can't be that old, can he? I know you hate old people.
No, he's not.
He's only 26. He's younger than us, so, he's not really old at all. But the fact that he's gone through the injuries
he's only 2 years older than RJ Harvey. RJ Harvey's 24.
That's psychotic. That's insane. I would have guessed he was 10 years older.
Yeah.
But obviously the injury history, and he did have the injury last year, but when he was out there, he looked pretty good. I understand why the Chargers pivoted to Najee Harris and then Omarion Hampton sequentially there as an upgrade, but he still has some juice in the tank, and I think Denver is a good spot for him. I think he kind of slots in as the 1A in this backfield, and obviously we'll talk more about Denver throughout the offseason, but I think we're both reasonably high on this as an offense, and if that's the case, the plus side of a running back platoon could potentially still have some value there, even in a platoon being in Denver. So, again, it reminds me a lot of what the Chargers are going to be like, and what we'll talk about the Steelers, where it's like, yeah, there's some appeal to it. It's just there's a lot of other situations I think I'm going to be going to before a Broncos running back.
Yeah, I think, look, I still think RJ Harvey is the 1A, and I think first snap of the season, you'll see RJ Harvey out there. I think just what this does is dampen the upside of a guy who it was really kind of limitless before. It was like, yes, this is a running back who got taken in the second round of the NFL draft, but entering an offense that, again, we do think is going to be pretty good this year, and having potentially no competition for touches, depending on what Audric Estime looks like in year two and whatever Jaleel McLaughlin can bring to the table. It was nice that there was literally no truly established NFL running back in this backfield with RJ Harvey. Now, just adding that muddies it a little bit. Now, again, we'll see where I fall with this when we do our I guess AFC West preview. But I do see a world where I am excited about the prospect of RJ Harvey and that his stock is dampened by Dobbins, and using that as leverage feels like the wrong word, but using it as Dobbins being the smokescreen for, okay, RJ Harvey's still going to be the guy, and let other people be concerned about the fact that they signed this guy who just put together his first semi-productive full NFL season and he still got hurt during it. I just don't know how I feel about RJ Harvey as a prospect yet. I mean, I haven't been grinding the college film. I don't know how I feel about him as a immediate contributor, but I definitely don't think this is that the Dobbins signing is a disqualifier from Harvey being a really major fantasy impact in year one. It's just how big of an impact will he be?
Yeah, I think, say, had they gotten Nick Chubb like they were linked to, I'd be right on board with you. Again, completely unmoved by it. But I just think the fact that it's Dobbins and we saw him be productive as recently as last year, to think just to pour some water on the fire. But is it a disqualifier? No, absolutely not.
100%.
And again, the injuries. He could always get hurt again, and it's RJ Harvey's.
It's true. Some other news, this on the defensive side of the ball, Pat. The Packers have released Jair Alexander. This guy hasn't played a lot of football for them over the past 2 years, but when healthy is one of the better corners in the NFL. So just want to note that he is available for a cornerback needy team out there. So we'll see where he lands Just want to touch on that. And the Packers are now so desolate at the cornerback position, Pat, that they are actually playing Bo Melton there in OTAs, which is hilarious.
I love it. You don't see that anymore.
No, you don't.
Guys like Devin Hester technically switched sides of the ball. Who was the guy on the Jamal Agnew? But he went from defense to offense. How often do you see a guy go offense to defense? I remember when your boys Julian Edelman and Matthew Slater had to play some secondary. Well, quite a few years ago for the Patriots, but I don't remember a situation like this.
Yeah, so definitely interesting. I guess we got a Travis Hunter cosplayer on our hands. Pat, we actually got something in the chat that I want to touch on because I did not put it in the show sheet. Again, some things just kind of go by the wayside when we miss an entire week of a show. Somebody asked, how does Frank Ragnow's retirement affect the Lions skill position players? This was a big one. Frank Ragnow retired last week. Lions starting center, one of the better centers in the NFL, and so now the Lions... currently, their ESPN depth chart projection has Graham Glasgow as their projected starting center, but their newly drafted Tate Ratledge out of Ohio State has been working out there and learning the position as well, so he could be their starting center. Remains to be seen. Normally, Pat, I wouldn't be that worried because it has been just one of the best units in football the last few years, but the fact that they lost Kevin Zeitler in the same offseason now creates a situation where there's a decent amount of turnover on what has been one of the best lines in football. Now, do they still have some of the best other linemen in football? Yes. Taylor Decker, Penei Sewell as that tackle combo is going to keep them fine. But are we looking at a situation where this isn't necessarily one of the 2 or 3 best lines in football anymore? I think that's a possibility. It's just something to consider. I'm not remotely pressing the panic button on any of the Lions skill players. I'm not really even downgrading them at this point. I do just think it's worth acknowledging that, combine this with the departure of Ben Johnson, this may be an offense that takes a bit of a step back this year just because of the culmination of several factors now that are working against them.
Yeah, and the way I see it is you have to think they at least had some inkling that Ragnow could potentially retire. They may not have been expecting it per se, but I mean, for them to take Tate Ratledge in the second round, I mean, at least showed that, you don't draft the guy in the second round and not expect him to potentially have a role immediately. So, granted, whether he plays guard or center, there seemed like there was a good chance he was going to be involved anyway. And I mean, Glasgow, if he is the one that moves to center, he's got plenty of experience as a guard, and I think he would be fine in the spot. And at the end of the day, I think it's just Dan Campbell, loves to run the goddamn football, and you've got to think Tate Ratledge was his guy to contribute to this. So I'm not terribly worried. I think if anything, it would be more of an indictment on the new offensive coordinator than missing 2 of their interior guys.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about, drafting your Jahmyr Gibbses of the world, or I'll say this, it does make me, maybe this is an overreaction, a little less interested in a guy like David Montgomery, just because Montgomery feels like he's been such a beneficiary of just being in such a productive, fertile fantasy football situation where he's getting all these touchdowns. Like, he's still going to be good, but I could see a world where David Montgomery is maybe a little bit less useful this season. Jahmyr Gibbs is a guy who I think talent's just going to win out with him no matter what, and usage is going to win out. Montgomery maybe just a little less interested in him. Everybody else in the Lions, though, I'm just going to kind of continue as usual with them. But good question. Thank you for bringing that up. We've got some players not at mandatory minicamp, Pat, and that's not good because it's mandatory, and they're not there. So that's just rude of them. But no, for good reason, because they all want more money, and they're all really good players. And weirdly enough, all of their first names start with T, at least the notable guys that aren't there. Terry McLaurin, Trey Hendrickson, and TJ Watt are not there. They're all seeking new deals. Obviously, the Hendrickson situation has been well publicized, and on top of that, their first round, I think Shamar Stewart is also not attending because of contract language as a rookie.
He hasn't signed his, right? Yeah.
He is also not at mandatory minicamp. Yes, first round pick. Sorry, I was bugging out there for a second. So the only two of the only defensive players on the Bengals with any sort of either pedigree or potential, neither of them are at mandatory minicamp, which just begs the question, Pat, what the fuck is wrong with the Bengals ownership that they seem to be doing this literally every year, rubbing
Chicks
somebody
dig the touchdown,
wrong way?
brother.
I guess. I mean, if these two played tight end, I guess. But then again, this is again the reason I'm saying that this front office has been mishandling everything is because before this, it was the offensive guys that they were fucking around with. T. Higgins has been in trade rumors for 3 years before they finally said, "All right, fine, we'll keep him around, whatever." Just hilarious that it's the same franchise that just continues to seemingly rub players the wrong way, players that they really need as well. So it's just very odd to me as it relates to the Bengals. T.J. Watt obviously deserves to be paid as one of the best defensive ends in the league as well, and then Terry McLaurin, really the only, I would argue, pass catcher worth a real damn in that offense. I mean, yes, they have Deebo Samuel. Yes, they have aging Zach Ertz. But, like, Terry McLaurin is the receiver that's going to make that offense go. I expect all of these guys to be out there week one, but just something worth monitoring right now as mandatory minicamp gets underway.
Yeah, I think if anything, Hendrickson would be the player in the most doubt because, I mean, T.J. Watt is most likely a Hall of Famer one day. Like, the Steelers are going to give him his due. And McLaurin, coming off a year where there was such good progress for Jane Daniels in year one, with Terry being his number one target, why in the world would that organization want to stop any of that progress? This isn't your old Washington front office here, so I expect that to get done too. But Bengals, yikes.
Yeah, big yikes. Some other fantasy relevant news and notes. Liam Cohen. Excuse me, Duval, addressing the Travis Etienne trade.
You know, you're supposed to be tooting, not burping.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Toot, toot. Liam Cohen addressing the Travis Etienne trade rumors, basically saying that they confused him because of just how much he has liked Travis Etienne as a player since arriving in Jacksonville, saying that he's done everything we've asked him to do and more. So it sounds like Travis Etienne won't be going anywhere, at least anytime soon, which certainly does dampen the toot agenda a little bit.
Toots.
However, it is worth noting that Cohen also had positive sentiments toward Rachaad White this time last year, who, although Rachaad White also had a good season finishing as RB20, he also got his job taken by the end of the year by Bucky.
But he got his job taken by a generational talent.
That is true. He got it by a future Hall of Famer, but Bashal Tootin is also a future Hall of Famer. So
we're not letting Bashal Tootin. No one will ever be Bucky Irving.
I think they can coexist, Pat. They can both be Florida boys who are just future Hall of Fame running backs and go to Disneyland together.
Just for Disney the record, instead of like talking out of my goddamn ass in terms of ranking players, like I finally like have made tiers, so like actually I can give like a solidified thing, and I've got Bucky Irving pretty fucking high.
As you should, pretty bucking high, baby. Bucky Irving's that dude.
I didn't know. I might even like him better than a player that I like very much that we're going to talk about later.
I would have Bucky Irving above Chase Brown as well.
One spot ahead of him.
just to spoiler alert that one. But yeah, totally fair.
Whoa! I was talking about Jaylen Warren.
Yeah, totally. If you didn't have Bucky Irving above Jaylen Warren, I'd have your house swatted. Another note: Falcons are open to trading Kyle fucking Pitts. No shit. I would trade Kyle Pitts for half of a saltine cracker at this point. Pitts also has not been participating at OTAs due to a strained muscle in his foot. So I know we talked about a couple weeks ago the possibility that he could be missing camp because of a holdout situation, to which I utterly rebuked that sentiment because in what
very
fucking world, very calmly if you go back and listen, because in what fucking world does he have the right to do that? It does sound like there's probably actually an injury at play here, but there have also been some Kyle Pitts trade rumors. Apparently the Falcons are only going to part with him for at least a day 2 pick, to which I say, I don't know if I would want my team to give up a third rounder for Kyle Pitts. A fourth we could talk. A fourth we could talk. Even as much as I shit talk the guy, we could talk about a fourth.
I hope he doesn't get traded just for the fact that if he gets traded to a spot that does not have a lot of competition at tight end, it is just going to reignite the whole fire, and nobody wants that.
There's already no competition at tight end. We've seen him in an ideal situation, and he can't do anything. What are we waiting for? Drake London had a great year last year, even with terrible quarterback play. And Kyle Pitts was a literal fucking potato despite that. And this year, he's in an even better situation because Michael Penix Jr., although we don't know what he is at the NFL level yet, we at least know he's going to be a more willing downfield passer than busted Achilles, washed-ass Kirk Cousins. So I don't know what situation Kyle Pitts could go into that we really reignite this could be the year conversation.
Chargers.
Yeah, I'll kill myself. I'll straight up. No, because you're right. You're 100% right.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Like there are realistically situations where it would reignite because it'd be like, oh, this team went out and got him specifically. It's a new start for. I just don't fucking want that. I just want him to stay in Atlanta, be mired in mediocrity, and for me to never draft him in my life.
Yeah, I'll simply end it all. Part of the rumors have been him going to Pittsburgh as well, Pat. That's been one of the teams, which Pittsburgh feels like it was foretold in some sort of prophecy.
KP Glazer incoming.
Especially with him going, rejoining Arthur Smith there and just being on a generally disappointing looking offense, which is just the perfect place for Kyle Pitts to be. But that's also why the Steelers have talked to the Dolphins, Pat, to move on here, about Jonnu Smith. Tight end Donald Parham tore his Achilles in OTAs for the Steelers, which explains.
Poor fucking guy, man.
I know. It's just a guy who's really shown a good amount of potential.
He was the
just cannot stay
XFL
on the field.
Correct?
I'm unsure. He may have been. He may have been. I'll let our researcher handle that, aka Pat, while I continue talking.
Yep, Arlington Renegades of the XFL. Yeah.
Okay. Also follows me on Instagram. Sorry, Donald. I hope you feel better. So this is kind of what sparked the Steelers to look for another tight end, even though Parham would have been further down their depth chart anyway. But I guess he probably would have been their second tight end as far as actually a receiving tight end. Obviously,
Darnell Washington got some passes too.
I was going to say, well, Darnell Washington's there to be fucking huge and catch passes occasionally. But
Jordan Davis of tight ends.
Apparently, the Steelers are just looking for any tight end that Arthur Smith is familiar with to get them on the team because they've also reached out about Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith also looking for a new contract from the Dolphins. It sounds like he doesn't particularly want to leave Miami, which I wouldn't either. A, it's Miami, and B, he just had his best season of his career by a mile with the Dolphins. So he was really good.
2 good years in a row for Jonnu Smith.
It was. And I'll say this. I'll say one thing. To Arthur Smith's credit, is I did see some people be like, oh, don't send Jonnu Smith to be with Arthur Smith and ruin his... Arthur Smith was the first guy to really get value out. Arthur Smith is the guy that played Jonnu over Kyle Pitts and started this whole
him in Tennessee as well, too. Look what Jonnu did in New England, the one spot without Arthur Smith until he went to Miami. Would be... Well, granted... I think it would just kill our boy Pat Freiermuth rather than... I think Jonnu would kind of stay on a similar level, but... Yeah, we'll talk about the Muth, my guy.
The Muth of Luth. Moving on, Pat. Let's get into the AFC North fantasy football preview. I don't know what it is about these North divisions because we started last week or 2 weeks ago with the NFC North, now the AFC North. Both divisions, Pat, chock full of fantasy football talent. Like some of the most valuable players and offenses in the entire landscape. Also,
and a lot of hot garbage.
I was going to say, also some of the worst here in the AFC
Cleveland
North.
Browns.
I think the AFC North has probably two of the most fantasy friendly offenses, and then one that's pretty gross, and then one that's fucking really gross. But Pat, let's kick it off with one of the ones that is just pretty gross, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers, to start with Aaron Rodgers, as I pull out my binder of notes here because I'm such an organized
you handwrite your notes. What are you, 2010 me?
I have been doing it because I feel like it helps things stick in my brain better.
Well, that's what they say. They say writing it down does help with retention.
You want to see how crazy this is, Pat? Look at this binder. Hold on. Wait. There's tabs for every team.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. So I went out of my way to do this. Yeah. Oh, it's very much spectrumy. But I am happily on it, tap dancing all over it. But let's start with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Pat, to circle back to Aaron Rodgers, who we opened the show with. So I think it's safe to say that Aaron Rodgers himself is not particularly interesting from a fantasy perspective. But let's look at the Steelers as a whole. Head coach, same as last year. Offensive coordinator, the same. Offensive line. seemingly pretty bad, but it was very injured last year and does have some upside. 4 of their 5 projected starters, Pat, have been drafted in the last 2 years. So there is some reason to believe that there could be just internal progression with that offensive line to make it not that bad. So that's just something to watch. As far as their weapons are concerned, it kind of feels like it's kind of gross. I mean, they've obviously brought in DK Metcalf, who, although he was there with George Pickens for about 5 minutes, is basically just the George Pickens replacement. Running backs, Jaylen Warren and Caleb Johnson. Wide receivers are DK Metcalf, Robert Woods, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson. And then at tight end, they've got Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington with a potential addition of Kyle Pitts or Jonnu Smith at some point, but not as of right now. My take on the Steelers right now is pretty much, look, Aaron Rodgers is 41 with a mediocre supporting cast and a pretty bad, seemingly, offensive line. This is going to be a run-heavy team with a very middling overall offense. So I don't think there's anything to get overly excited for here, Pat, but we can start with, I mean, do you have anything really to say about Aaron Rodgers other than you're out?
Yeah, I mean, I can see a scenario in which he becomes like a streamer at some point during the middle of the season, but I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to be regularly in lineups whatsoever.
No, I wouldn't think so. I texted Pat a couple hours before the show and said, there's a player I'm kind of falling in love with, and this tends to happen as I research for each division, throughout the day. Pat, I like Caleb Johnson.
Yeah, huh?
I like Caleb Johnson. I didn't expect to like Caleb Johnson because he's playing for Arthur Smith until I gained some perspective here, Pat, because so much of the downside to me mentally about having an Arthur Smith running back was confusing ass usage. And that's going to happen. Like, I'm sure there will be times where he's using fucking Kenneth Gainwell or Cordero Patterson at the goal line or Darnell Washington on a fucking jet sweep.
Hell yeah. Oh, that would be electric.
No, it'd be the slowest jet sweep you've ever seen.
They have Trey Sermon on the roster as well, apparently.
They do. But so much of my frustration was, Bijan's rookie year, Pat, with the Falcons, right? Just didn't reach the heights that we thought he should or would because Arthur Smith refused to fully commit to him the way that we thought he should. Here's the difference with Caleb.
Thought he should. It's the way he should have.
The way he should have. Here's the difference with Caleb Johnson, where I had to remind myself. So at the end of the day, Pat, in that rookie year with the Falcons, Bijan Robinson did finish as the RB9. It just felt disappointing compared to expectation. Caleb Johnson is ranked and being drafted as, wherever you look, early in the process right now, RB 25 or so, if not a little bit later. If he can finish as even the RB 15, that is a massive, massive value for where he's being picked. And as a rookie running back with fresh legs and with what we think is the ability to make more out of his amount of touches than what Najee Harris did in this Pittsburgh offense last year, I think we're looking at a guy who's going to be a real screaming value. And look, this is going to be a trend, I think, throughout our divisional previews, Pat, because I think this is going to be the trend of the fantasy football season, is that rookie running backs are going to be a thing. Like, a real thing. And when I say thing, I mean quite possibly like the theme of this fantasy football season, because all of them ended up in at least good situations for fantasy production, if not great situations. I won't say Caleb Johnson's in a great situation because, again, I don't expect this offense to be that good. But, Pat, this was the team with the 4th most rushing attempts in the league last year. Now, granted, a lot of that...
Harris,
granted, a lot of that was weighted up a little bit by having Justin Fields as their starter for 4 games, or 6 games, whatever it was. However, I looked, and if you take away Justin Fields' carries and replace it with like more of an average amount of carries, like what Russ was doing, 4 or 5 per game, they still would have been about 6th in the league in total rushing attempts. So Arthur Smith is going to have a run-heavy offense. I personally am putting my chips in on Caleb Johnson rather than expecting Jaylen Warren to really have a major change in role. I kind of just expect Jaylen Warren to have the same role he had last year, maybe a little bit more, just because he's working with a more inexperienced back rather than Najee Harris as the incumbent.
Yeah, I'm with you for the most part, and to kind of go back on the whole Bijan thing, the difference here between there is you're also coming off a Tyler Algier 1,000-yard rushing season as a rookie. Like, there was a clearly talented running back to go with Bijan there to potentially, hamper some of his carries. Jaylen Warren is not that.
No.
Like, Jaylen Warren has been that guy that everyone wants to be a thing. And, he's not bad, but there's a reason why he never truly supplanted Najee Harris like everyone wanted him to. And while Najee, was solid, if Jaylen Warren, really performed, he could have taken that role, and he never did. He just straight up never did. And we talked about the comments the front office made about, like, oh, would you like Jaylen Warren to be your RB1? And he was just kind of like, sure, wouldn't hate it. Like,
right.
Yeah.
He's got that skill set. Yeah, totally. He could do it.
Yeah, the fact
and then
that
they drafted RB in the second round.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If they really thought that Jaylen Warren could be that guy, they would have drafted a running back in the 4th or 5th round. Not in the second round here for an offense. And again, he was the guy picked by Arthur Smith, who loves running the football. Loved it in Tennessee, loved it in Atlanta, loved it last year in Pittsburgh. So you've got to think he's got a role in mind for him. I don't expect, Warren will be a little annoying. I think it's going to help with no Justin Fields, because that was one of the more pesky things about Najee Harris, was did not get the rushing touchdowns that he might have had Justin Fields not been there. And Rodgers will have the occasional 7-minute 40-yard dash scamper, whatever.
Rodgers doesn't really move anymore. I saw a stat
Rodgers
today.
will stumble into the end zone.
He hasn't run for more than like 100 yards or something in like 4 seasons. So I'm not really worried about it.
But exactly. So like the touchdowns will be there, and Warren, has not shown to be like a short yardage guy. It was always Najee in the short yardage situations. So yeah, Jaylen Warren doesn't move me a whole lot. Again, he's going to take snaps and take touches, which kind of what limits Caleb Johnson. But at the end of the day, I think he's going to be getting the valuable touches. I think he's going to still be getting the majority of the touches. And I think, where he's being drafted right now, low-end RB2, high-end RB3, I think that's strong value there.
Oh, it's incredible value. Like, it's a guy, Pat, that, like, workload projection-wise, I understand the offense isn't going to be that good, but it doesn't have to be great to have Caleb Johnson be a really good fantasy asset. I mean, the guys he's ranked near right now on Fantasy Pros consensus ranking, Pat, they have him as RB29. I expect that to climb a little bit. But the guys going ahead of him, I mean, I think I'd rather have him than Isaiah Pacheco, RJ Harvey, DeAndre Swift is up here. Fuck DeAndre Swift. I understand the projection of the workload, whatever. I don't care. Tony Pollard, like, he's just a guy that I am absolutely willing to chase the upside on as RB29, because I think the floor is fairly high as well, just given the amount of touches that he's going to step into. So I am very much in on Caleb Johnson. I just kind of see him as the rookie running back that is getting overlooked a little bit compared to the other guys. I think these other guys are getting a lot of shine. Obviously, Ashton Genty is the superstar rookie running back of the fantasy football world right now. And then I think you've got guys getting a lot of pub more than Caleb Johnson, including Travion Henderson, RJ Harvey up to this point. Again, we'll see how much the Dobbins signing kind of dampens that. But even Quinshon Judkins stepping into that Browns running back room, which we'll touch on in a little bit.
Whatever that is.
Whatever it is, I think Caleb Johnson has the potential to be the guy that, got overlooked, and then you look up and, oh shit, he finished as a top 12 back, and nobody's surprised because who the fuck else was in that backfield? Yes, Jaylen Warren, but not a guy you were ever projecting for a ton of touches. Let's move on to the receivers here, Pat. I guess we could just say the receiver. It's DK Metcalf. I don't think, and I know there's no other Steelers receiver that you're going to be starting the season with, probably even on your roster. I don't think there's any other receiver that's even not that they're not draftable, but they're not draftable beyond just being a complete lottery ticket.
Well, that's the thing is I love saying in the late rounds, who cares? Throw a lottery. There are so many better dart throws than any other wide receiver not named DK Metcalf on the Steelers. Like, I'd honestly argue there may not even be another pass catcher really worth drafting on the Steelers outside of DK Metcalf. So you'd think like, oh man, that means DK Metcalf's going to be huge and have all this great production. Try again. But I make that sound like I don't like DK Metcalf at all, which is not true. I actually think he'll be an upgrade over George Pickens just because he's not literally beating the shit out of guys 20 yards down the field during plays. But again, DK Metcalf, I don't know if he's ever truly reached the heights that we've wanted him to, but he's a solid NFL wide receiver, and that's why they went out and got him. And we saw Rodgers do well with Devontae Adams and at times Garrett Wilson last year. Granted, is DK Metcalf better than either of those two guys right now? No, probably not. But he's still an established wide receiver who can slot into that kind of role. Then I think the problem becomes the offense and the volume. Neither of those are going to be particularly plentiful. But I still think with the lack of competition, I think we're still looking at DK Metcalf as like a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. But there's a lot, you look at other guys in that range, there's a lot more exciting picks there. Like Metcalf would kind of just be like I need a wide receiver. We know he's going to be out there. We know he's going to get targets. I think the upside is a bit capped, though.
Yeah, DK's a guy that, like, obviously I see the obvious positives, right, of him being the only receiver on that depth chart. But he's just not a guy I see myself drafting, Pat. I don't see myself being excited to draft him. I actually drafted him for the first time last year, and he was fine until he got hurt. But look, we're talking about a guy who, again, is going to be on one of the run-heaviest teams in the NFL with a quarterback who is not better than Geno Smith. Like, and DK was very up and down throughout his career in Seattle as well. Granted, had some better guys around him in Seattle, but again, you mentioned, that him not being a guy that's really reached the heights that we wanted him to reach. He hasn't finished better than wide receiver 16 since 2021. And as of right now, he's being ranked as wide receiver 24 on Fantasy Pros. So, like, if he were to achieve wide receiver 16, like, yeah, you got back some value, but one, I imagine he's going to do that in a pretty annoying fucking way, where he's going to be one of those guys that scores 23 and then 2, the other week. Just, it's a guy that I could absolutely see finishing as a wide receiver too, but he doesn't feel like a guy I'm going to want on my team, and I don't feel like I'm going to regret not having him on my team. I don't really see a world where DK Metcalf builds this incredible rapport with Aaron Rodgers and is just, has a career best year. There's other guys, and even at other positions, I think I'd rather go after at that point in the draft than DK Metcalf. Now, if he falls in your draft in like the wide receiver 30-ish range, yeah, I might be interested because, again, he's only guy on that offense. But right now at wide receiver 24, which is where he's ranked, like, I'm good, Pat. Like, the guys behind him, Devonta Smith, even we've talked about how we don't love the wide receiver 2s on a team. I think I'd rather have Devonta Smith. I think I'd rather have Jamison Williams. I know I'd rather have Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd rather have Chris Godwin, Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave.
Where's Marvin Harrison ranked in that?
Marvin Harrison Jr. right now is 21st on consensus.
Because I was going to say, he's a guy that I've kind of envisioned in that range. I'd much rather have him than DK Metcalf.
Yeah, so a little bit above DK, but I mean, this will fluctuate certainly throughout the offseason and preseason. But yeah, I don't know. I don't see it really with DK in this offense with his already just inconsistency that he's had throughout his career. Pat, we talked about the other receivers here that they're not really worth rostering. The only one I want to make a slight case for as a dart throw is a guy I think I drafted in our fantasy rookies draft last year, and then he didn't end up playing a game. But it's Roman Wilson. Just because he lost his entire rookie season to a hamstring injury, and as a third-round pick, it's a guy that the Steelers are reportedly counting on making a big jump this year, which to me says he could at least be a starter for this team on a wide-open depth chart that is currently, again, DK surrounded by Robert Woods and Calvin Austin III. Calvin Austin III started about half the Steelers' games last year. He's good for an explosive play here and there. I don't think he's ever going to be a fantasy trustworthy sort of player because he's going to be too inconsistent. But Roman Wilson's a guy that, like, if anybody else is going to emerge as a semi-consistent pass catcher on this team, I could see it being him, especially with DK being the guy that, takes the top off the defense. Roman Wilson has maybe freed up to operate underneath. This is going to require him to actually win that job because, again, right now he's not a projected starter. Robert Woods is despite being old as shit, very good blocking wide receiver, which is going to be valuable for a team that's going to run as much as Pittsburgh is going to run. Also a guy that was with Arthur Smith in Tennessee. So, again, he's got to get on the field, but as far as, like, late-round darts that I could see being fantasy relevant, I like Roman Wilson a little bit with maybe one of your very last picks.
Yeah, I don't know if I would use the term like, but if I have to choose another Pittsburgh wide receiver, it's definitely Roman Wilson, just for the upside. Like I said, Calvin Austin was Calvin Austin the second when he started in Pittsburgh and all the hype, and now he's been demoted to the third. Like, the guy... If I'm wrong about that, come back to me. But I don't know. I just thought of that and I thought it was funny. So
he's got such a great receiver name too. What a shame. Calvin, first of all, I mean, is great. Just Calvin Johnson.
Very Austin, similar to Tavon Austin. You know,
Austin. I think Tavon, even Miles Austin, and then you got the third. I mean, everybody loves the numbers in there. All right, Pat. Let's move on to the Cincinnati Bengals. Quite possibly the most fantasy friendly offense in the entire league. This is a team that has just the perfect storm of reliable offensive weapons that you know who the offense is going to run through, on top of having a disgustingly bad defense that is going to force the offense to have to score points every single game. As far as just their overall, overlook for the Bengals, head coach is the same, offensive coordinator is the same, the O-line is bad, but who cares? The weapons are the same, the run game is good. I think this is as bankable of an offense to invest in as you can think of. And let's just start with Joe Burrow, Pat. What's interesting with Joe Burrow for me is I see you have him as QB4 here. I assume that's ADP. Fantasy Pros,
ADP, yeah.
Fantasy Pros Ranks has him as QB5. What I was worried about with Joe Burrow was that after finishing as QB3 last year, that it would get overcorrected a little bit and that he would be ranked too high off of what was a statistically likely for regression sort of season for him, where he went for 43 passing touchdowns, 9 interceptions. However, if you're getting him, I assume in most leagues, Pat, he's going to be the 5th quarterback off the board just because the 4 above him are so adept at the rushing part of things. Yeah. If you can get him as QB5 after the Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks, the 4 quarterbacks,
brother,
rush a lot. It just feels like the safest pick you can possibly make, because even factoring in regression, Pat, Joe Burrow had a season. Actually, let me word it this way: Joe Burrow has never finished worse than QB8 in a season where he played the whole season. So it's only been injury that has ever held him back. 2 years ago, where he had a season that I think is more in line with maybe what we can expect this year with just some natural regression, where he had 35 touchdowns and 12 interceptions, he still finished as QB4. Like, if this is a guy that you can draft at QB5 with theoretically no ability to finish lower than QB8, but with the upside to finish as a top, 2 or 3 quarterback, like, I feel really good about that. That makes me feel I am more interested in doing something like that than I am taking a guy like Lamar Jackson in the late second round. Like, that's just me personally. So yeah. I just feel like Joe Burrow, he's truly the exception to this era of fantasy football, where he is not giving you anything with his legs, and yet you can still trust him with your life as long as he can stay on the field. I would be a big proponent of drafting Joe Burrow to round out that sort of top 5 of fantasy quarterbacks, just because of how safe he feels.
That's the thing, to be safe without that, because we always talk about with safety the rushing floor. He doesn't have one. I mean, he'll scamper for something here and there, but it's by no means consistent. So you got to take that completely out of the equation. And the fact that he is in the conversation with these elite rushing quarterbacks just goes to show how good he is, how good of a situation he's in, and the players he has around him. Yeah, and you know what? Currently, at least the ADP on Fantasy Pros has him going 33rd, which is late 3rd round. Oh no, am I really that boring? You're just like my wife. You left me.
Sorry, I stepped away from my camera for a second. I had to turn my fan on because it's fucking hot.
Well, you're wearing a sweatshirt. I'm also boiling, but
I'm a moron.
Pants.
I shouldn't be wearing a sweatshirt, but we keep my apartment at about 68 degrees, so it's fucking normally cold. But whatever.
Yeah, but yeah, yada yada yada. But there's no reason to not love Joe Burrow. Going 33rd, late 3rd, it's like, do you really want to use a late 3rd or an early 4th on a quarterback without that rushing upside? That's tough to do, especially as an asshole who took Patrick Mahomes in the 4th last year. I'm a bit gun shy to do that again, but if he can fall a little bit and these guys kind of go for the rushing quarterbacks, yeah, he is definitely the best of the bunch outside of that.
Here's the thing about the Mahomes situation, though, Pat. The only reason Mahomes isn't good is because his defense is good. Like, Mahomes' defense allows them to play this control the ball style of offense. That's not happening in Cincinnati. That's
fucking happening,
the
man.
Bengals defense. Again, their only two relevant players on that side of the ball aren't even at camp because they're being shit on so bad by the front office. Like, this is going to be an offense that needs Burrow to throw. So again, there are exceptions to every generality, and Joe Burrow is the biggest one. I don't care that he doesn't run the ball. I don't. He's now proven, to me at least, that this wrist injury that we were worried about is a non-factor. And with that being the case, I no longer have any reservations about Joe Burrow. And at QB5, again, like, he's maybe the most prolific pure passer in the NFL. And I think it's a safe floor for him. So I would be happy to draft Burrow there. I imagine in most of my leagues, I'm probably going to take the wait on QB approach just because there are a lot of young guys I like. But I will not fault you if you want to take Joe Burrow after those first four guys come off the board, because there's a chance you end up with the QB1. Like, that's not out of the realm of possibility for Joe Burrow, and that's not an outcome you can reasonably say is in the cards for really anybody you draft after him, I don't think. Pat, Chase Brown, to move on to the backfield here, this is a guy that you are just absolutely in love with.
I love Chase Brown so fucking much.
When I texted Pat that there was a player I fell in love with, and it was Caleb Johnson, I hadn't told him the name yet. He said it better not be Chase Brown or you're going to the gulag. But I do like Chase Brown a lot. I mean, again, we talked about it, Pat. One of the seemingly most at-risk running backs of the team, adding more competition. They didn't really do much. They drafted Taj Brooks with a 6th rounder. They brought back Samaje Perine and Zach Moss. They brought back as well. And two of those guys stink, and one of them got picked in the 6th round. So wheels up for Chase Brown in an offense that, again, is going to need to score 1 million points to win games.
Well, that's the thing. You look at Chase Brown last year once. You know, I remember he got that first game against his first start was against the Raiders, because I had just traded for him, and he just absolutely, blew the socks off everything. And from there on, I think the thing that kind of gets overlooked with him is his passing game prowess. Not only was he being targeted, he's catching these targets. He caught 54 passes on 65 attempts. Having a quarterback like Joe Burrow is going to play in his favor here, and potentially needing to be in a shootout. You could say, oh, that's taking him out of the run, blah, blah, blah. You can talk about Samaje Perine all you want. Chase Brown is probably going to be on the field in those situations, or at least a decent amount of those situations. Zach Moss scares me not at all. Like
he just looked straight up bad last year. He was not.
And then to have a neck injury the way he did, it's just, again, the blocking. But they had no problem trotting Chase Brown out there. They brought in Khalil Herbert, and everyone was like, well, he was just there for decoration. Like that team now on multiple occasions has clearly shown that they have all the faith in the world in Chase Brown. And this is an offense that is going to be really fucking good. So to have that to where they're going to be in red zone situations, and to also somehow be in situations where they're going to have to, throw the ball and have a faster pace offense, he fits every single thing you want here. And I think it's so indicative of how absolutely filthy this top tier of running backs are. I only have him as my RB9. And I'm talking about how much I love this guy. Yeah. Like, that is how good. But the fact that I think you could get a guy this good, currently the ADP on Fantasy Pro says it's RB12 at 27. My goodness. Take an elite wide receiver in the first rounder to get him early 3rd round. My goodness. Yeah. I'm going to have a hard time picking my Pat's pal because there's two others in particular. Obviously, one of them's Ashton Genty, but there's another third guy that I'm just like head over heels for this year. But Chase Brown is certainly going to be one of my favorite players as we go through the offseason.
It just feels like one of the safest picks you can make, which is crazy because I was not a Chase Brown guy this time last year or even in the middle of last season, because Pat, I do think he's going to play a few less snaps this year just because this backfield was demolished through the end of the season. Like, they got to a point where they couldn't play anybody other than Chase Brown. So, I do think you'll see Samaje Perine out there. I do think they'll mix in maybe even some Taj Brooks, but it just doesn't matter. With how fantasy-friendly and how offensive-focused this team is going to be, you can still feel good about having Chase Brown, even if any of those guys take some snaps here and there, because he's going to be the guy that gets the lion's share of touches. I'll say this, just because I'm a very sort of paranoid fantasy drafter. I like Chase Brown. I would absolutely draft Chase Brown. if I draft Chase Brown, I will, with my last pick, take Taj Brooks, just in case. Because they drafted a guy into that backfield. I'm so unafraid of the other two, and I am still acknowledging the fact that, Chase Brown was not a guy that they had planned to give such a clear workload to. That
I didn't think he'd be a big load back, yeah.
Didn't think he'd be a big load back. So it seems like there is opportunity for somebody to step into that role. I think Taj Brooks has the best chance to do that, just because I don't think there's any chance the other two do it. But again, that'll be something that you have to follow throughout camp as well, because if he's just straight up practicing with only the third team, then it's just not worth bothering yet. You could just pick him up off waivers. But as it stands right now, that would be a guy that I would just, again, for no other reasons than paranoia, I would take Taj Brooks just to see if maybe, even as a 6th-round pick, that he can carve something out. Pat, the wide receivers, I don't think there's too much to say. Ja'Marr Chase is going to be one of the contenders for the first overall player drafted in fantasy leagues, as he should be.
I think he should be the contender, to be honest.
It's him, Bijan, and I think Saquon as like the top sort of tier of players. If you had to ask me, let me see what Fantasy Pros actually tiers them out. What do they say?
I throw Jefferson into that tier as well.
They've got actually a 6-player tier 1 of Chase, Bijan, Barkley, Jefferson, Gibbs, and Lamb. But to me, I would almost tier it slightly lower, just with 3 guys with Chase, Bijan, and Barkley. But Chase is that dude.
Yeah, for me picking it 3. I can sleep well at night knowing I'm going to get, one of those 4 or so guys in my lap. But yeah, for me, if I have the first pick in a draft, I'm taking Ja'Marr Chase. Like, you're just kind of scared that he may miss a game here and there like he's kind of seen to do, but him and Joe Burrow click like no other combination that we've seen in a long time here. And to have the combination of possibly the best pocket passer in the game and the best wide receiver in the game, you can't ask for that much more there. You can't ask for much more. So, like, I love Bijan, I love Saquon. Yeah, like I said, I even love Justin Jefferson as well this year. For me, he is the guy for me.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And I said this before, like, I think it's funny that, he's ranked as this top 3, realistically number 1 guy, just because he finally did in a season what we already knew he could do. Like, we knew this was within his range of outcomes. We knew this was within his range of outcomes the whole time, because we knew how good Chase was and we knew how good Burrow was. It just took him finally doing it for the fantasy community to, rank him actually at that number 1 spot, which I guess is fair. You got to actually see it. T. Higgins, Pat, is an interesting one, because T. Higgins last season finished as wide receiver 18. However, let me look up where his point. Yes, he missed time. I believe points per game. I don't want to talk out of my rumpus here, but T. Higgins in terms of points per game was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Wide receiver 10 in. Oh, sorry, excuse me. These are projections for fucking next.
Because he did miss 5. He did miss 5 games.
Fuck off, ESPN.
Why Copernicus.
No, fuck that place. Yeah, because this is what I thought it was. Okay, T. Higgins was the wide receiver 4, Pat, in points per game. That's what I thought. So he's an interesting case because, I talked before about how even if Burrow regresses, he will still be a very good fantasy quarterback. I think T. Higgins is the one that I would be worried if Burrow comes down from this, 43 touchdown outburst that he had this year, that T. Higgins could be the one to kind of take the brunt of that. Granted, he's ranked as wide receiver 13 right now for Fantasy Pros with a wide receiver 12 ADP. Those numbers just differ slightly. How do you feel about him being ranked there? Like, does that make you nervous just with what we've seen from T. Higgins in seasons prior?
See, the thing is I think we finally really saw. I also realized I put him as tight end 14 in our thing because I think it's because his name is T, is probably because of the mistake I made there. But we really saw him, live up to that potential when he was out there. Like he said, like looking at his stats now, and we're kind of uneasy about wide receiver 2s in general, but I think if you're going to pick a wide receiver 2, it's T. Higgins over a guy like Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle or whoever else, or Travis Hunter, whoever else I'm forgetting, Devontae Adams even. Maybe Adams I'd probably rather have than him, but I see, the funny thing is I've never drafted T. Higgins, so I could sit here and be like, oh yeah, I like T. Higgins. And I just it just scares the shit. Like, I would maybe take him when I inevitably go all wide receiver again at the start. Like, yeah, I'd consider taking him as my third. But it just scares me so much. And again, I think it's a vibes thing. It's, fantasy football is a numbers game, but it's a vibes thing for me right now.
Look, you could say it's a vibes thing, but also worth mentioning that, like, T. Higgins is banged up seemingly all the time. But this is what would really scare me off of taking him at this spot, Pat. T. Higgins, again, ranked as wide receiver 13 in consensus rankings. T. Higgins, including last year, has never finished better than wide receiver 17. So why are we drafting him 4 spots ahead of his career best finish? I mean, I understand it's because of the points per game that, like, oh, when I have this guy out there, I have, based on last year, a top 5 guy. And based on other seasons, if you were to break out the averages of the games he actually played, at least probably a top 12 to 15 guy. But I don't know, Pat, that I already wasn't, like, excited about drafting T. Higgins, even though last year was where he finally seemed to put it together in the games he played. I don't see myself taking him. I love the Bengals. Again, I love the Bengals offense, but he just seems like a frustrating guy to own, even though this offense is going to be so fantasy friendly. I'd rather just pick up Mike Gesicki off waivers the weeks that T. Higgins isn't going to play and start him because he's God whenever T. Higgins misses time. So that's kind of where we're at with that. And that's really just to talk about the tight ends. That's all we need to say about Mike Gesicki.
Realistically.
The targets and the offensive just production on the Bengals are so consolidated to these 3 guys when they're healthy, that being Chase, Higgins, and Chase Brown. Sounded like I said 4 names there. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Chase Brown. That you don't really have to worry about anybody else. Mike Gesicki, for as talented as he is, does not really do anything when those guys are out there. Neither does Andre Yoshivas, who I think is a talented player, but just not going to break through that.
Gesicki's the epitome of, like, a nice thought at tight end. Right, where it's like, yeah, he's got the Jawan Johnsons, the Chigakonkos of the world. Where it's like,
sure.
yeah, they could. It's just not going to happen in this situation.
Agreed. Moving on. The Baltimore Ravens, another offense that is just loaded with fantasy goodness, especially since bringing in Derrick Henry. Head coach is the same. Offensive coordinator is the same. Their O-line is quite good. Their weapons are basically the same except bringing in DeAndre Hopkins, which, again, name value. I don't care that they brought in DeAndre Hopkins.
I forgot that they brought in DeAndre Hopkins.
They did.
I'll be honest.
They did. So as it pertains to the Ravens, Pat, Lamar Jackson is QB2, which I think he absolutely has earned, deserves, obviously.
No question about it to me, yeah.
Just not a spot where I think I'm going to be drafting a quarterback. Again, I mentioned it with the Bengals. I would rather wait a little bit and take a guy like Burrow, who I feel like is just as safe with maybe a little less of that higher end upside. I think it would be a little surprising if Burrow finished as the literal QB1 just because of that lack of rushing ability. But Lamar Jackson, I obviously still like quite a bit, just not a guy I see myself drafting. If you want to draft him in, the late second round, where is likely where he's going, feel free to do so. I do think he's probably due for some passing regression as well. I mean, the numbers were egregious for him last year. 41 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, just unholy numbers for a guy that people said was going to be a running back. So I think those will decline a little bit. But again, the season before that, he was quarterback 4. You can feel pretty good about him as long as he is on the field to be one of the very best at the position. I don't see that changing.
Well, I think that passing performance from last year is very encouraging in the sense that he only had 4 rushing touchdowns last year.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, you bring in Derrick Henry, where obviously Derrick Henry's great everywhere, but he's a freaking bull at the goal line. Like and he took away a lot of the touchdowns. And the fact that Lamar was still as effective as he was just goes to show that, hey, he still had over 900 rushing yards last year. Like, he's still very much a running quarterback.
Yeah.
But even though he's not necessarily the number one running threat on his team, I still think, I think his ADP is still justified here. Will I personally be taking him? I don't know, again, but I think that's more of a representation of positions rather than how I feel about Lamar. But if you're going to go for Lamar there, I think you're well within your rights to do that.
Absolutely. Derrick Henry, Pat, to move on to the backfield here. He has forced me to eat lots of crow and or raven, which are basically the same bird. I think I'm over judging Derrick Henry for his age. I think this is a guy, like, look, there are other players who I just refuse to buy in at their certain age because, like, I just don't want to be the guy that gets caught with it at the end, you know, that gets stuck with the year that he does finally decline. That applies to certain players out there. I don't think Derrick Henry is one of those guys. I think Derrick Henry is just such an anomaly at the type of player that he is that it doesn't matter how old he is. He's just going to continue to be good for a bit longer.
You know, that's the thing is, going into last year, it's like, oh, the only guy we've seen do it after age 30 is Adrian Peterson. It's like,
this is the same
maybe
mold.
that's because Derrick Henry is an all-time great running back, just like Adrian Peterson was. Like this whole career, this guy's deal has been that he's a physical freak of nature,
right.
That he is just huge and has the speed and the power and everything. Like, he is just truly an anomaly. And even at 31, I'm not concerned about it at all. Like, going into last year, the positives were that, hey, you know, maybe they may not want Lamar to run as much. You know, they love to run the ball in that Todd Monken offense. That's John Harbaugh's thing. It's still going to be a good offense. He's still going to have opportunities. Every single thing that could have gone right pretty much did. And while he faded off a little bit at the end of the year, mainly compared to Saquon, who had his foot on the absolute gas, like it was through the road. He wasn't even through the floor with his foot on the gas pedal. He was still really good. And, you know, going here at, what is he, RB5, let's see where I have him on my list. I have him at RB5. So, like...
Way to go out on a limb.
I actually didn't look before. I usually do, and then just, like, you know, am a sheeple and just kind of go with what they say. But I don't know, there are a couple guys I like a little better in that range, maybe a little younger, but the upside is still there. Like, you could be like, oh, these guys are young, they have the upside. Even at 31, Derrick Henry still got the upside. He's still got the upside.
It's just, we talk all the time, and it will have in the past at least, about touchdowns not being a sticky thing year to year. Yeah, unless you're Derrick Henry. And
unless you're fucking Derrick Henry.
Unless you're goddamn gigantic and are going to score a bunch of touchdowns. Pat, you mentioned he faded at the end of the year. I mean, he faded in, like, I would say, Q3 of last year, but he finished the year like a little fucking tank. Granted, a lot of people hopefully aren't playing fantasy in week 18, but in week 17, he was the RB3, 27 carries for 147 and a touchdown, and then week 16, he was still the RB11, 24 carries for 162 yards, no touchdowns. But yeah, before that, most of the season, he was really, really good. Week 10 through 13, left a little to be desired, never finished better than RB12, including 2 finishes at 22 and 19. But it's a guy that, like, you're still going to feel pretty good about the floor he's going to provide you most of the time. Here's the thing. I like Derrick Henry, and he's not like he's certainly not a do not draft player for me. I've given up on that.
Yeah, stop. Stop it. Get some help.
I don't know that I could spend, like, where is he ranked overall right now? He's the 12th overall player.
His ADP is 12,
I guess at the turn, I'd feel good about him at the turn. I don't think I would draft him.
I do too.
I guess this is because fantasy has become such a wide receiver-based game, even though our league is horny for the running backs. I saw him as RB4 and was like, I don't want to spend a first half of the first-round pick on a guy that, you know, does have those games where he's plotting a little bit more and just isn't quite as good. But no, at that point, at the turn, yeah, he's more than worth the pick. He's just such a fucking beast, and we got to stop trying to predict the fall off for him. We're starting to sound like Max Kellerman saying the Brady cliff was coming, because you don't predict a cliff for a generational talent, because it's probably going to come much later than is expected.
I want Iguodala.
Martians pointing the laser beam at Earth. I want Derrick Henry to fall off. Well, too bad. It's not Keaton Mitchell season, and it probably never will be.
Well, that's the other thing, the fact that they didn't bring anyone in. It's Justice Hill and Keaton Mitchell.
Exactly.
Nothing to be scared of there.
Pass catchers, Pat. Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, and then we've got a couple of tight ends, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. It's just not worth talking about DeAndre Hopkins. He's not going to do anything. Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers, wide receiver 26 for ADP right now, wide receiver 22 as far as ranking. Zay Flowers is always a weird one for me, Pat. I don't know. He makes his living off of, like, big plays, but also, like, really high target games, and then surrounded by much lower target games. He just feels like he refuses to ascend into that, like, next tier of player. And so he's just not, I don't know. Maybe this is just Ravens receivers in general for a team that loves to run it as much as they do.
That's the thing is he's clearly shown the talent. He's shown to have a good connection with Lamar. But I just don't think this is that kind of offense because it's still so much through the running game and so much through the tight end, at least when they get down into the red zone. The tight end gets so involved in that offense where it's like, yeah, you're getting a number one wide receiver on a great offense, but there's a lot of guys in that archetype that I would much rather have than Zay Flowers. And I did own Zay Flowers in the league last year. The inconsistency was just awful because then you'd sit him and he'd blow up. And then you'd start him but he had a few games here with 1 or 2 targets. You can't have that as a guy that you're depending on a week-to-week basis. Can he break through and get the consistent targets? That would be fantastic. Again, the talent is absolutely there that should he get the consistent volume to go with that, he could easily be, he's a wide receiver 26 right now, could easily be a top 20 wide receiver. Yeah, if that's the case.
Yeah, his 2 finishes, his first 2 NFL seasons, he's finished as wide receiver 29, and then last year, which, felt like a breakout year for him, still only wide receiver 24. So just a guy that, feels like a solid flex, like a guy you're happy to have in there. And that is, to his credit, roughly where he's being drafted. So I don't think it's a bad pick, but it's not a guy that, again, being ranked right now as wide receiver 22 on Fantasy Pros. And again, the reason these are 2 different numbers, they have where people are picking them. I'm not really paying attention to ADP right now because it's June. So I'm just kind of looking at where the experts are throwing these guys right now.
You're telling me you haven't done 100 best ball drafts? No. Sorry, I don't mean to, I love the fantasy flock. I don't mean to mock the guy. That's insane though. 100, it's June.
I hate best ball, Pat. I really do. Best ball is a cancer to the fantasy football community.
I did one last year because I was outside of, or 2 years ago because I was outside of Connecticut lines. Yeah. And was able to do it, and then I just completely forgot about it. Well, obviously you can forget it, but
I didn't even have to do anything. Yeah.
Well, but I didn't even remember who was on my team. That was how little I cared about it. Yeah,
Here's the thing: it's just as a sidebar, best ball is fun, and I'm glad it exists. And I've mentioned this on the show before, but I hate that it has shifted fantasy analysis to be oh, this is my opinion on this player. And they won't tell you that opinion is mostly based off of best ball. And it's best ball's not redraft. I don't give a fuck if I have a guy that can be the wide receiver 1 in a given week, but then is just as likely to be the wide receiver 35. Stop telling me to draft that guy. That guy's a nightmare for normal fantasy football. So I feel like so much analysis has shifted toward best ball, and that is driven me insane. Rashad Bateman had a bit of a breakout year last year. Where is he ranked these days? Rashad Bateman, wide receiver 55 consensus. So you can get him, obviously very cheap. He was a guy that also was seeking a trade, was permitted to seek a trade, and the Ravens ultimately brought him back.
That was why they brought him back. That was reported this week.
Yep, brought him back on a 3-year, $36 million extension. So, certainly not breaking the bank, but a guy that they said, hey, we want to keep him around. Also a bit too boom bust for my liking.
I'm not
interested. And again, here's the thing, Pat. Being a boom bust player one season, that doesn't mean that's what you are for the rest of your life. But when this offense is looking the exact same as what it was last year. Again, they only brought in DeAndre Hopkins. For a guy that's been in the league for, this will be his 5th season in Rashad Bateman, what do I have? Why would I believe that he's going to be anything different? I would rather take a shot on a guy that you could at least reasonably predict or reasonably hope is going to be ascend to that next level, because I don't want to draft the wide receiver 34. I just don't. I'd rather draft somebody else.
And for that to be such a run-heavy offense, and to be clearly behind Zay Flowers, behind Mark Andrews, probably behind or at the same level as Isaiah Likely, in an offense that it doesn't function like that, I just have extremely little interest in a guy like Rashad Bateman.
Yeah, and it's funny, Pat, because, we talked about the gaudy touchdown numbers from Lamar Jackson, 41 touchdowns to 4 interceptions this past year, and yet we look at both their starting receivers, and we're kind of like, And you want to know why that is, Pat?
4 touchdowns.
You want to know why that is? Because for as bad as Mark Andrews started the year, and as bad as it still feels like he did last year, he led all tight ends in receiving touchdowns last year, finishing with 11. That's insane.
The fact that Mark Andrews is tight end 9 is mind-boggling to me. I understand he's becoming a bit more boom-bust than you expect from a guy like Mark Andrews. But at the end of the day, that's the basis of the tight end position. Like, guys like Travis Kelce and Brock Bowers and Mark Andrews have spoiled us, in a sense, because so much of the tight end, especially if you're kind of going a little later, is just praying a guy can catch a touchdown. Mm-hmm. Mark Andrews is still so much more than that. He's so much like, yeah, he'll have the game where he is vanished, where he's even at the end of the year, he only had a couple of 2-target games. But even in those games, he caught a touchdown. He is still clearly Lamar Jackson's favorite target. And that is who he is looking for when he is throwing the ball in the red zone and into the end zone. The fact that he is going 9, I have Mark Andrews here. It's tight end 5. For me. Like, that is how much more I like him than what he's being viewed as the consensus this year. Like, yeah, there are going to be those weeks. There are going to be those weeks. But I think that beginning of the year where he was comedically bad, like almost droppable bad, has set a tone for him to potentially be a really, really good value.
I'm so torn on Mark Andrews because you're absolutely right. Like, he's the guy that Lamar looks for in the red zone. He's a guy that you can probably bank on, I would say at least 8 touchdowns, even in a down year. But he doesn't feel like a winning fantasy pick to me. And here's the only reason I say that, Pat. The last time Mark Andrews had over 70 yards in a game was November 5th, 2023. And if you're looking for a guy, like, I understand you can't shoot for the moon and the stars with every single pick, but if you're looking for a guy that is really going to be, like, you're going to be happy that he's a part of your lineup all year, I don't know that he's that guy. Like, would I settle for a guy that's going to score fairly consistent touchdowns in my lineup if I missed out on everybody else? Absolutely. Like, that's, at least I can have that baseline. But I look at, Fantasy Pros a little higher on Mark Andrews than where you were looking, but he's tight end 6 for Fantasy Pros, right? So the guys
I'm looking at ADP, so what the people?
Fair.
I'm a man of the people.
That's fair. I mean, look, and that may be where the people land after how much he burned them last year, so that's fair. But the guys behind him, I do think I like him probably better than Jonnu Smith, just because that was an odd year with Jonnu, and I assume Tyreek's going to bounce back a little bit this year and take some of that away. I like him better than Travis Kelce, who I am just not touching with a 10-foot pole, with Rashee Rice, being back and ready to go. But once we get down to, like, and considering the fact, too, that these guys are guys that you can get a couple rounds later and, spend your earlier picks on guys that aren't Mark Andrews, once you get down to the Evan Engrams and the Tucker Krafts, not to say I like them better than Mark Andrews, but I like their value better than I like Mark Andrews. So I don't know. The lack of yardage is really hard for me to get over, but I understand that the touchdowns will probably be there. But it's also not just that, Pat. It's Isaiah Likely being there. And the way they're talking him up, I don't know if it's pure coach speak, but look, John Harbaugh saying his goal for Isaiah Likely is for him to be an all-pro. That is a direct quote. And that, to me, at least says, I mean, unless he's just straight up talking totally out of his ass.
He loves talking. He might be the ultimate coach speak guy. He might be number one.
But, like, that tells me that they are envisioning a bigger role for Isaiah Likely. And we saw a glimpse of that week 1 last year, and then it just didn't
he had a couple
manifest.
other good games as well. But that's the thing is, I think with the presence of Mark Andrews, I mean, yes, like, Isaiah Likely will cut into Mark Andrews, but I still think it's going to hurt Isaiah Likely a lot more than it's going to hurt Mark Andrews. And to me, he's just not a guy that I even really care to draft, because at the end of the day, he's a number 2 tight end. And since the gunslinger Aaron Hernandez, when was the last time? That was like the last time we truly had a tight end 2 who was a more than viable fantasy start. I don't dislike him as the player. Yeah. And when Mark Andrews, they do move on from Mark Andrews to the moon. Isaiah Likely to the fucking moon. But that's just not, it's 2025. It's just not happening at the moment.
I get that. I do think there's a non-zero chance that Isaiah Likely could take over as the tight end 1 this year. I'm not predicting that necessarily, but with the downturn that we saw from Andrews in the first half of last year, which is still a little bit inexplicable and
he
concerning
dropped
that
it dropped a touchdown pass too.
Right, and concerning that it happened at all, and with the fact that Mark Andrews is a free agent this upcoming offseason in 2026, we could see that changing of the guard this season, and all of those factors combined are why I'm probably not going to have any Mark Andrews this year. But He could
More for
absolutely
me.
just be that guy that scores all the touchdowns and does the thing once again. All right, moving on to our favorite offense in the division, Pat.
Play the fart noise.
Oh yeah, wait, fuck. I definitely have. I'm gonna make it really loud. Yeah, Cleveland Browns.
Like,
Just a single toot.
honestly,
Toot.
like I put in our thing, on the basis to make our show sheet is you have to have an ADP better than 200 because most drafts are 192 picks. The highest Cleveland Brown quarterback is going at quarterback 35. Is for all intents and purposes the fourth guy on the depth chart in Shador Sanders.
Yep.
So with that being said, do not draft a Browns quarterback.
No, God no.
But
Even though by fantasy season we will know who their quarterback is, but yeah, don't fucking do that.
But the thing is, I mean, assuming it's going to be Joe Flacco or Kenny Pickett, but you're not touching either of those guys. But there is a situation for some of these pass catchers to have some value, and the guy that I mainly am honed in on is David Njoku, in a similar range to Mark Andrews. Again, he was really good at the end of the year last year. He had that game that almost got me into the fantasy playoffs. He tried his damnedest on Halloween night there. No, whatever night that was against whoever. But and remember 2 years ago, him and Joe Flacco had a great connection. So it's like, if Joe Flacco is the guy, which, do we think Kenny Pickett's going to win a quarterback competition? Do we really think he's going to win?
Particularly, I think it's probably going to be. I think it's probably going to be Flacco, or if one of the rookies really blows them away, I could see them starting. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be.
I'm going to look at it from the basis that I think Flacco comes away with that job. Where again, he likes to sling it for better or for worse, and. As I say this, I like this with Njoku. That's kind of specifically because of value and whatnot. I still can't do it with Jerry Jeudy.
Me neither can I.
Can't.
I'm so good on Jerry
Good for
Jeudy,
him.
man.
He
I'm
made
so
a
all
Pro
set.
Bowl. He made a
Yeah.
Pro Bowl. Great for him. That team is just terrible. And you could say, like, oh, he can get the garbage time and stuff. That's great. He's wide receiver 30. Like, he's a guy that is realistically being drafted as a flex. 67 ADP right now. Come on, math, don't fail me. That's round 6. Yeah. Round 6, round 7. Mm-hmm. I don't want a garbage time king in round 6 and round 7 when I could be getting other extremely valuable players at that point.
Yeah. The players ranked right behind Jerry Jeudy I want all of them immediate. The players ranked directly behind Jerry Jeudy consensus right now are Travis Hunter, R.J. Harvey, Calvin Ridley, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Johnson. It's mostly rookies and Calvin Ridley. I want all of them more than I want Jerry Jeudy.
I do too.
A fucking mile.
This is one thing that I'd rather just not do and be wrong about.
Yes.
Than
Agreed.
draft him and be wrong about it. I would much rather say, like, wow, Jerry Jeudy really exceeded my expectations. I'll pick him next year.
Right.
That's great. If we're having that discussion at the end of the year, we're having it. But we're not going to have the discussion that we're getting burned by Jerry Jeudy when if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And this situation is the biggest fucking duck. Like, put him in a fucking lemonade stand that I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah. No,
And again, the same goes for Cedric Tillman, where Cedric Tillman looked good before his brains got scrambled. But again, if we don't like Jerry Jeudy, are we really going to like Cedric Tillman? Like, I have in my Dynasty League, like, I hung on to him. He made the cut through, the cut to get the guys from the taxi squad up. He made my cut. Like, I think there's still potential for him. Just not right now with the situation they're in. I just can't do it.
I just think we know what Jerry Jeudy is, and look, he finished somehow. Jerry Jeudy finished as a wide receiver 1 last year, finishing as literally the wide receiver 12, despite having 2 wide receiver 1 weekly finishes all year.
But
So that hilarious in itself that's
I
even
want you
possible.
to know that the same week as the infamous Taysom Hill game, I was in Epcot, and I play in a league with a lot of my friends who don't really know anything, and I was facing Jerry Jeudy by one of my friends who does not know much about football at all. So I was just getting double bombarded by 2 of the worst days of my fucking life. merged into one in fantasy football. So I'm mad at Jerry Jeudy. And what did the Browns do to Pat? What did the Browns do to everybody?
The Browns.
What have the Browns done well to anybody?
Here's why there is just a generally negative sentiment about the Browns' fantasy prospects. I think this is going to be the worst team in the NFL. That's where I'm at with the Cleveland Browns. With the quarterback play, with just everything. Like, I know there's some pieces at least to hang your hat on where the roster's not totally desolate. But at the end of the day, it starts with the quarterback position. And I just don't think this team is going to do anything of note next year to where I want any pieces of this team on my team, except maybe one guy. Maybe one.
Well, I was about to say, like, with all this said, Quinshon Judkins?
Yes.
Shrug?
He's the one.
Like,
he's the one.
Again, I took him in my Dynasty League over the likes of RJ Harvey and Caleb Johnson. And I didn't put him on the taxi squad. Like, he's the guy that I expect to be involved this year because, God, for those of you OGs who still were listening this time last year, knew about my Jerome Ford fetish. And I will just take the colossal L, except for that 1 week at the end of the year. Jerome Ford's just not very good. Like, the combination of a not good offense, a not good situation, and just a not very good running back, it's just not going to happen. Quinshon Judkins is probably a very good running back. You know, he gets drafted like that. For him to get drafted before Henderson.
The comp I'm looking at for Quinshon Judkins is fast Joe Mixon. So that sounds pretty good.
Great. Hopefully he doesn't beat women, but besides that, that's a great comparison.
That would be, I would hope for the same thing.
But
yes.
for them to spend that on him and not do anything else and just hang on to Jerome Ford, and I'm sure they'll bring in Deontay Foreman like they do every year at some point in the middle of the year, and Pierre Strong, whatever. But for them to, as bad as they're going to be, for them to throw him, like, I think he's like the perfect dead zone kind of archetype this year, where he's strictly in the dead zone, not based on volume, just because his team fucking stinks. And he's a rookie. But at the end of the day, there still will be volume. There still will be some touchdowns to be had. You know what? I believe Quinshon Judkins is what? He's going as RB24 in ADP. So, like, right at a low-end RB2. I might want a guy a little safer there. And just in the sense that, like, the volume's safe, the Browns are not safe. But at the end of the day, yeah. I am not completely out on Quinshon Judkins in spite of everything that we've just said about the Cleveland Steamers here in the last 5 minutes.
Look, I mean, players emerge on bad offenses every year. Like,
Look at Jerry Jeudy.
Exactly. One or two guys can, still produce pretty well, even if they're surrounded by some dud weeks because the offense just fucking cannot get the wheels off the ground. And that may happen. But I think he's a guy that just sometimes the pure talent of the player wins out. And at the end of the day, Pat, Kevin Stefanski's pretty good at putting together productive run games, even with bad versions of the Browns teams that he's had. So, yes, definitely still interested in Quinshon Judkins. Also, somewhat worth mentioning Dylan Sampson as well. He was a fourth-round pick as the other running back in that backfield. So he could maybe water down some of Judkins' upside, which is why I might prefer a guy like Caleb Johnson over him. Obviously, Caleb, has Jaylen Warren, but then you've got Judkins dealing with, in theory, both Sampson and Jerome Ford. I don't know. You got to pick your poison there. But still, at the end of the day, yes, very much in on Quinshon Judkins, very much in on probably most of the rookie running backs that were taken with any sort of reasonable draft capital, and even some that were taken with much later draft capital. But, folks, that will do it for our AFC North fantasy football breakdown. Let us know what division you want to see next week, and we will bring that to you hot and ready, fresh off the platter. Pat, got anything left to say to the people before we end this wonderful show of ours?
I forgot. And what did the Browns do to us? Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, true. Very true. Yeah, that's why they deserve all the pain in the world, is because they got Deshaun Watson and then tried to make him work, and then he just popped his Achilles.
They deserve everything 7 times. They're getting right now.
Deserve
I
absolutely
said nothing
everything.
really that sus today, unfortunately, so I'm going to be lacking. And I didn't do this either, so we didn't really have time for that either. So I guess we're just cramming that shit in at the end.
Yeah, well, that's all right. No bits today, so I guess we'll just end it with this.
Yeah,
For Pat
no bits
Gustafson,
today, yeah.
I'm Brandon Carney. We'll see you guys next time.
I have nothing to say. Bye-bye.
All right, for those of you still here, we will answer our questions. Oh my, we have 14 of them from donations.
Appreciate you guys.
Of course. First, we've got Puka Glazer 69 with $2. Said Puka
love you, Puka
2025
Glazer.
Offensive Player of the Year. Also Jair to the Rams. Maybe. Jake with $10. Thank you, man. Said, why is every single draft analyst making fun of the Falcons for getting James Pierce Jr.? You're the experts. I don't get it. Was he not a first-round talent? Their most desperate need was pass rush. I personally have not made fun of that pick, so I haven't seen a lot of people making fun of it. I am
think
unsure.
it's more so they gave up a lot to get back into the first round, more so than the actual pick itself in James Pierce. And I guess that's kind of the way I feel about it. I have no issue with with them picking James Pierce because you're right. You're right, Jake. It was by far their most pressing need, and they've addressed that. But the Rams may be liking that next year when they have that extra pick, but.
Yeah, I guess that would be the only thing. I think it was well worth the pick from a talent and a need perspective, so I am unsure. Alex with $5 said, this is quoting Shamar Stewart. Alex is our resident Bengals fan. I'm 100% right. I'm not asking for anything that's never been done before. They want to win arguments instead of games. Yeah, that absolutely seems like the Bengals' MO at this point. They just want to start fights with their players for no fucking reason and make everything literally as hard as it has to be. Very Dallas Cowboys of them.
Any quote that starts with "I'm 100% right," you just know it's gonna go hard.
I love it. We're on Team Shamar over here. Lucian with $2 said Bay shall tootin', and then said sad Jair noises.
Jair to the Jags.
Jair Alexander fan. Yeah, I don't know. Lucian with another 5 said, fun fact: Rodgers threw more touchdowns and had the same interception count as Patrick Mahomes. A-Rod took more sacks though. Yeah. This just furthers the fact that Patrick Mahomes is just not a very usable fantasy asset. It says more about Mahomes than it does Aaron Rodgers.
Absolutely.
But Aaron Rodgers is also going to a team that somehow has even less weapons than the Jets did, which is kind of depressing.
The Jets had Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall.
Yeah.
That's not a bad group at all. It's the Jets.
The Steelers have future Hall of Famer Caleb Johnson, but other than that, they don't have much. Alex with another 2 said, in 24, Burrow got a third of his rushing points on one play. Is that true? I don't remember that.
I do recall a longer touchdown.
That's funny. Let's see. Bucko, welcome back, Bucko, with 10, said, if McDermott doesn't at least get to the AFC title game, do you think he's on the hot seat? Because although it's the playoffs again, it's another year of stagnation for the Bills without improvement. Yeah. Look, at a certain point, if you can't get over the hump, I think you got to make a change just for the sake of making a change.
Sean McDermott's a really good football coach, and he's brought the Bills to a really high level. But at the end of the day, you don't play. You don't get a trophy for making it to the AFC Championship game every year. You're trying to win
Colts
Super Bowl.
You do. You put up a banner for it, actually.
You're trying to win Super Bowls. And if Sean McDermott can't do that with his main culprit still being the godforsaken Kansas City Chiefs, it might be time to do so. But, Sean, inshallah,
At a certain point, I heard that. At a certain point, it's what's the risk of getting rid of McDermott, right? Because it's like you get to a point where you want to win a Super Bowl. Like, that's all you're trying to do. You've done everything else. You get to the AFC title game every fucking year. You at least want to get to the Super Bowl. At a certain point, it's like, what is the risk of getting rid of a guy that has not done it the entire time he's been there? Yeah, the risk is that you get a worse coach and you don't even make, the semis, or you don't even make the AFC title game. But, at the end of the day, that's still a season where you didn't make the Super Bowl, and so it was worth taking the risk of trying to find a guy that can get you there. So, yeah, I think one more season of that, and he's probably in some danger.
The worst thing that could happen is him summoning the Taliban on the Buffalo Bills.
Have you seen that they're calling Tyrese Halliburton the Halliburton?
Incredible. So I saw, the one where it was like, man, this is like 9/11 for people in New York, and I'm just like, God damn it.
That's
Twitter
good.
is golden. Yeah, the fact that they have to call him the moment. I want to hear Doris Burke call him the Haliban.
The Haliban. Bombing threes. All right. Alex with $5 said, the instant that Jermaine Burton fully proves that his head is completely removed from his booty hole, don't be afraid to throw a late round dart. Yeah, it's totally fair. He's a great talent.
I was reading about him and, kind of saying that he was saying his benching was disappointing, but he understood it.
Yeah.
You know, his whole problem, even coming out of Alabama, why his stock wasn't nearly as high, was character
personal,
issues.
yeah.
He's certainly more talented than Andre Yoshivage, the GOAT. But he's certainly far more talented than that. Like, yeah, if he does get it together and is able to carve out a role in that offense, yeah, you know, is it going to be a thing where he's super fantasy relevant this year as long as those two are healthy? Probably not. But trending towards the future, Jermaine Burton can absolutely still be a thing here.
Absolutely. Cole with $9.99 said, the eBay Diggs jersey I bought that you said was a scam came in, and it looks identical to all my other Pats jerseys. Looks like it's from the NFL shop. Hey,
Hell
man,
yeah.
I'm happy for you, brother. That's good. You save some coin there then. I get a little gun shy with those jerseys, but I'm glad it worked out for you. Tyler with $4.99 said, love the show as always. Have you guys ever thought about doing a listeners league? We certainly could.
I've brought it up.
We certainly could. I'll go as far as to say, Pat, we will do one. How about that? How about that? We'll figure out who to get the fuck in that league, and we will get it done.
We'll have to do some kind of like send in like a video.
Send
a video in, and that'll be one of your YouTube videos. Oh, I think we got an idea here.
Oh, we
just sit here and live react to the videos. Oh my god, that'd be actually really good.
That could get us canceled very quickly. I may need somebody third party to just pre-screen them.
We can still pre-screen them and pretend.
But then it's not a live reaction. That's cheating.
Neither are any of these live reactions anyway.
But I'm genuine, Pat. I'm an honest content creator. You're the other guy. So like, you know, you don't need to have pride, I guess. Omega with $4.99 said, you explained to me how Lamar is going to regress in a contract year where he gets a better wide receiver 3 and his division got even worse. How? Because statistical regression does not always depend on outside factors. Sometimes things in general, stats are just more random than people give them credit to be. Lamar is not going to throw for more touchdowns than he did last year. I'll put it that way. I would stake my claim that Lamar is not going to throw over 41 touchdowns. Regression is just about looking at what the anomaly season was, even if it was only a slight anomaly, and assuming that it's going to come back toward the average, which is just the most likely thing to happen. So, look, I'm not saying it's going to be for lack of motivation or lack of ability. Lamar is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Regression just happens when you have a statistically outlier season, which he just did.
I got to point something out here. Our boy Lucian, he was listening back when we used to have 10 people watching, has never played fantasy football. My brother in Christ, what the hell are you doing here?
That's really funny.
We're not that handsome and entertaining. I mean, we are, but
speak for yourself, Pat. I mean, Jesus, look at this.
But we appreciate you even more.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fucking wild. Bucko with 2 said, think the Saints will be worse than the Browns. Yes, the Saints are the other contender to be
definitely
worse
in the
football.
NFC.
There's a few contenders, and they are definitely up there. Bucko with 5 said, never bring up your Jerome Ford fetish again, Pat. Heard enough of it last year.
The only time it's going to be brought up is in dunking on myself.
Yeah.
For my last year's son. He will never be brought up in a positive light again.
I can't wait until he's a relevant waiver guy because he had
I'm not allowed to talk about him.
And you have to not be excited about him, or you will.
Well, you know what I'm gonna do. Well, you know what I'm gonna do is be like, I was ahead of the curve. Never
wrong, just early, which is how I'm starting to feel about Sean Tucker, by the way, because I talked this guy up 2 years ago, and I still think he's gonna be a thing.
I remember the Sean Tucker year.
He's
God,
gonna
we've been
be
doing this. This is our third offseason doing this, dude. That's fucking crazy.
Sean Tucker season, baby. Cole with 199 said, thoughts on Kyle Williams' fantasy value. One of my favorite late round darts because that receiver room is just so goddamn wide open that he could be the guy, especially if Stephon Diggs continues to just sell coke to whores on boats. All right, we'll answer a couple questions from the general chat here. Let's see. Lucian said it's a podcast with one of my favorite NFL content creators. Of course, I'll tune in. Hey, I appreciate
and you,
that,
Brand.
Man.
That's nice.
And me. I know. That's all. I'm just a bonus. It's true. What else we got? And if anybody wants to send in some fresh questions, some freshtions, we will answer them. Alex said, longest you've ever spent editing a video. Jesus Christ. If we're talking consecutive, probably 14 hours total. I've definitely spent 30 plus hours editing video.
My Lord.
The 100%. So yeah, I would say probably about 30.
That's dedication, brother.
Hey, listen, man. Got to pay the bills. It's how I'm buying this house. No one heard me say that. That's some post-show exclusive for you guys. There's a house in play. Kai said, how high are you on Devon Achane? He was terrible inside the tackles, and this made him much less effective on those more explosive touches. I have him at RB12, and he probably won't be much higher. I'm very much in on Devon Achane because, yes, he was terrible inside the tackles, but the Dolphins, their line can't be any worse than it was last year, and they were such an abysmal offense in general. And the fact that Achane was still able to produce more often than not, at least with like an acceptable output, if the Dolphins can just not be a complete dumpster fire this year and Tua can stay on the field and they're not totally injured, like he's going to be really good. Again, he's just a really good player. He's a guy with one of the safest floors you can get because of how many passes he's going to catch. I'm in on Devon Achane.
I'm more in on him than Kai as well, just because. No Raheem Mostert. There is some talk of Jalen Wright being expected to make that step up,
and I could see that. My camera's dead, but
Pat show.
I'm just going to kind of let the camera be dead. We're almost done.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and don't waste your time. But also about how they expect Achane to really step up with with some of these more in between the tackles. Carries available, so you have him at 12. I believe I have him at like 7 or 8. Honestly,
he's RB6 on Fantasy Pros. Overall rank, I mean, he's probably a late second round, mid second. Okay, 14th overall on Fantasy Pros. So I mean, yeah, again, another guy I'd love to take at the turn. If you went RB heavy and came out of the turn with Derrick Henry and Devon Achane, I think that'd be pretty sick fucking start if you ask me.
No kidding.
Let's see. Is Malik Neighbors worth a first-round pick in a 12-player league? Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. End of story.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. What else we got here? After the Browns segment, I hate being a Browns fan after this offseason getting cooked by my favorite YouTubers. Listen, brother, nothing personal also with your Josh Allen profile picture. That's odd. But
what's he going to do? Publicly represent the Browns?
You like a bad team that's kind of been a dumpster fire for a long time. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you. All right, Pat. I think we can actually let's do one more. What's the one
Pat,
more?
For Pat from Bailey. I've been getting into baseball more besides the casual level, and it's been fun. Of course it is. I'm an Astros fan. Do any of my guys get in the Hall from the 17 team? Absolutely. Carlos Beltran will get in next year. He got close. Stupid that he wasn't in on the first ballot to begin with. And Jose Altuve will as well. Just the numbers will be too hard to deny whatever impact he had. Thank you for asking a baseball question.
Here, I actually want to do this one. Hot take for you to analyze. Patrick Surtain will win MVP
PS2
and Defensive
Glazer.
Player of the Year. No, he will not.
So will
and
George Pickens.
Last one, for real this time. Brent said, how do you think Emeka Egbuka will fit? I love Emeka Egbuka as a player, and I think he's going to be reliable right out of the gate. It's just going to be hard to have him be a consistent producer when he is the third best receiver on his team at best.
Yeah,
it's just going to be hard. I think he's going to be an amazing. He's going to be an amazing fit from a real life perspective, and he's going to keep Baker Mayfield as a great fantasy quarterback because he is just overloaded with good weapons now. But I think Emeka Egbuka is going to have to wait a bit for his true breakout. He's going to need to wait for Evans or Godwin to go out to pasture.
And Kyle says, what's a guy got to do to get a question talked about? Here you go. You're welcome.
There you go. Said, I get it. Can't reference the Colts guy. Oh, he said this was his question. This is why I ignored your question because it was dumb. Do you think AR is even hurt? Is he just quitting on his team again? I think so. No, he's hurt. If he was quitting on the team, he would be quitting on the NFL because this is his last chance to stay in the goddamn league. So
Daniel Jones time, baby.
So no, I don't think he's quitting on the Colts at all. That would be the worst career move possible. I think he's actually hurt and it's just a terribly timed injury. But I appreciate you, man. All right.
Yes,
that is going to be the end of our show. Thank you, guys. We will catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning into the Pat Show. All right.
Whatever.